Today, I will be ranking every One Piece arc from Romance Dawn all the way to Egghead Island. And I'll be ranking these arcs on a scale from peak all the way down to shit. This list will be based on the anime continuity, no filler included though, up until the anime branches off from the manga on Egghead, where it still has to catch up. So let's get into it. So, starting off pretty simply, we have Romance Dawn. This is the first arc in the story, and I think is also the shortest on this list. I don't know, it's between this and I think Reverse Mountain or Reverie, but that doesn't really matter. Anyway, this is really just the arc where all of the main characters get introduced. It's broken down into three parts, being Luffy and Kobe on Alvida's ship, Shell's town, and then Luffy's backstory. I'll break down all these parts and just what I think of them. The Alvida or Luffy on just Alvida's ship is probably the weakest part of this arc in general. It's the literal first episode if you're watching the anime. It's also where Nami gets introduced, though I'm not really sure if she's named yet, but she is there. And it just basically goes how it goes. Luffy beats the fuck out of all the pirates, saves Kobe. It's a nice moment, not really significant or all that memorable in the grand scheme of things in One Piece, but it's the first chapter, or first episode, what do you really want? So, after that, Kobe tells Luffy about Shell's town. They eventually go there, run into Rika and Zoro, how Meppo's being an asshole, and then Rika gets thrown over a wall, also kind of fucked up, but not all that memorable in the grand scheme of One Piece. Shell's town was alright. I liked how well it showed off Luffy and Zoro's skill set. How we got shown the idea that blunt attacks only work on Luffy. How bullets actually just bounce off of him. It's really creative how it all works together and just it's shown super well in this chapter or arc. And then we also have the introduction of Zoro and his three sword style. How all that works. That was also a pretty good introduction. Zoro's always cool. And he actually gets to take down the main villain, quote unquote, of this arc with X and Morgan. Guy's around for an episode and a half, but I'll still call him a main villain. And that doesn't really happen that often. So it was just meant really to be a strength or a show of Zoro's strength. And then there's also Luffy's backstory. That's pretty important. Really paints Luffy's character and his motivations. Also, introduces the idea from Oda of generational passing stuff down, if you know what I'm saying. I forget the exact word I was just gonna say, but generational inheritance almost. I really don't know exactly what to call it. But the transferring of the will down to the next generation. You know how if you've watched One Piece, will is a big plot point. Right up there with backstories and families, but it gets introduced here in Luffy's backstory. Higumo's alright, he's kind of a prick, does his job well enough. So, with all that being said, this arc was really just an introduction, and it does that well enough, so I'm gonna put it in the mid tier. I can't really do it any better, just looking at some of the other arcs on here. Can't do better than mid, but respectable enough. Now on to the first non-introduction arc. We have Orange Town, and this is still just Luffy, Zoro, and Nami at this point. Usopp's in the next arc. This is where Nami really gets introduced and kind of fleshed out. Obviously not as much as in Arlong Park, but a good amount here. A lot more than we got in Romance Dawn. So this arc is really just about establishing the main crew, and I guess finding a map for the Grand Line, because that's really what they were doing here. Not all that much happens in this arc. Luffy pulls up to a village with Zoro, or gets taken by a fucking bird there. Some weird shit happens. But they get there. Luffy and Zoro just kind of steamroll Buggy's crew. Luffy gets put in a cage at some point. Zoro has to carry him. That's a pretty cool moment. The Buggy balls were a nice touch. I thought that was pretty creative. How he just has his own special way of cannonballs, and that's his best tool. That isn't really a concept that I thought was gonna come up that much. Just I thought cannons would just be like as useful as guns are in One Piece. Unless you're like talking about a sniper, but that's the rare case. Um, Buggy was an alright villain. I honestly didn't mind him. He was fairly threatening, the first Devil Fruit user besides Luffy we see in the story. So this introduces the idea that Luffy's going to be fighting other people with Devil Fruits. Though that really was just like kind of given from the start with the introduction of the power system in the first place, but this is the first time that happens, so pretty significant. His lackeys are Kabaji and the Lion Tamer guy. I fucking remember his lion's name more than his name, which the lion is called Richie, but they're kind of shit, honestly. Kabaji was better than the other guy who I can't even remember his name, but they're really just there to be steamrolled. There was Cho-Cho and that whole like sad backstory that happened with him. I guess this is Oda trying out the tragic backstory for the first time, but it's with a fucking dog, so while it is sad, we're not really connected to the character all that much. Like, you could feel bad for a dog, but like, you aren't really connected to a random dog you just saw in One Piece in time. But nonetheless, it is still sad. It's fucked up that that lion guy burned down his shop or whatever. Overall, a fairly mid-arc. All of the side characters weren't all that memorable. Buggy was, I kind of remember the village chief guy with the armor. He was just kind of there. He tried to stab Buggy at some point, I think. Got his ass beat. He's an old ass dude, what do you expect? But overall, this arc was just fairly mid. There wasn't really anything to complain about besides maybe this guy, but I can't rank it lower than Romance Dawn. Now we're moving on to Syrup Village. This is Usopp's arc. This one, honestly, is probably the weakest out of all of the East Blue arcs. Usopp is fairly annoying at first. His whole like lying antics, they get tired. Like you get tired of him fairly quickly. I didn't really fuck with Usopp in early One Piece. It took me a while to warm up to him, but it isn't really the end of the world in this arc either. It's just like kind of there. This arc, the Straw Hats are really just searching for a ship. That's how they come across Usopp and Kaya. And I honestly think Usopp's like whole like storytelling to Kaya and lying to her is his best like part in this arc. Just like his whole dedication to her, and while he is still lying, it isn't really annoying, and it's more just like kind of sweet, honestly. So no complaints there. I would say that gives some points to the arc. Kuro at first just seems like more of an uptight parental figure, but turns out, big reveal, big twist, he's a villain. He worked as a servant, performing a normal job for like, I don't know, however many years he was doing that. For her fortune, where it's just like, at that point, couldn't you have just become successful yourself? And that's honestly one of my main problems with this arc is Kuro is quote-unquote the smartest man in the East Blue, smarter than people like Ben Beckman and Nami, who have been shown to be very smart, though we haven't seen very much of Ben Beckman, but you can infer. But Kuro just makes a lot of like stupid decisions and mistakes that aren't really like, that really shouldn't be made by someone with his title. And I think that just kind of like fucks him up as a villain as a whole, because Kuro, like, I'd rank him above Wapol, but like he isn't a very good villain. We have the rest of his crew as well. Oh, another problem I have with this arc, like I said before, with common mistakes with Kuro, the entire the plan that the Straw Hats have is just saved by Luffy falling off a cliff and Kuro just deciding not to make sure he's dead. Like, come on. That is just kind of wacky, even for One Piece, but again, not really the end of the world here. It's just like minor gripes I have with the storytelling. This is still really early on into the story, so it's not like I'm expecting Oda to be perfect. I honestly liked how they did it in the live action a lot better than they did in the manga, with the whole like actual mystery aspect and like horror theme going on, if you've ever watched that. But getting off topic, the whole like battle at the ramp was alright. I honestly thought Django had a pretty cool concept. The Meow Band brothers were kind of alright. I thought they were better than Buggy's lackeys, I'll give them that. And the idea of like a 2-on-1 fight was pretty cool, and Zoro had to be nerfed to fucking high hell to fight them, but I don't know, that's just kind of how early One Piece is. Him and Luffy are comparable, so he's gonna have to get fucked in order to fight fodder. That's really like a common theme throughout the East Blue now that I'm thinking about it. Zoro getting nerfed. But I feel like Django's value gets a bit undersold here as well. He's a hypnotist, that's a pretty unique like move set that we don't see too often in One Piece, but he gets his ass beat by 12-year-olds instead of getting an actual fight. Which is definitely a funny gag scene, but at the same time, just like, I feel like it's a bit wasted potential. Especially with an arc that is just kind of shit overall. So, with me just saying kind of shit there, I guess you can already tell what I'm going to rank this.
being in kind of shit tier. This isn't like awful and unwatchable, but it is kind of a drag sometimes and has a bit of a lackluster villain, so it goes in this tier.
Now we're finally starting to get to the real arcs, with Baratie being the next one we're doing. Now, this is probably my favorite arc out of all of the East Blue Saga, with it just being like the arc that really hooked me into One Piece. And this is where Sanji gets introduced, also Yosaku and Johnny, because Usopp accidentally blows them up and they have scurvy. It sounds like a weird setup, I know, but you get it if you watch it. And then I think Luffy either shoots the Baratie or like flings himself into the roof of it, which causes some damage, which... Let me bring up the setting of this arc, because this is the first time it's not just like a random village, and it's actually like a really fucking cool place. Where the Baratie is like a floating fish head in the middle of the ocean that's also a restaurant that is known to have the best food in the East Blue, I'm pretty sure. And it's just like a really sick location, and is like the start of Oda like making these... I wouldn't say the floating ship is like fantastical, but later on we get some like fucking crazy settings like Wano and Whole Cake Island, but that's for later. So the Baratie is really like the first arc where it's in a really unique and like exclusively One Piece world setting. I guess this could be made in real life, but I wouldn't plan on it. Either way, the setting is just cool. That's what I was getting at. The idea of a floating restaurant is cool to me. All the chefs there are fighters. Zeph was a former pirate himself, with Zeph being the owner of the restaurant, the person Luffy incurred the debt to and is working for. And Zeph is basically Sanji's like parental figure, and their whole like familiar relationship is reinforced pretty heavily throughout this entire arc, with Zeph and Sanji being like the first super strong parental like esque relationship we get shown in One Piece, which we get a lot of these later on, like even in the next arc and the next like couple arcs we get a lot of these. So Sanji's and Zeph's relationship is very important to the arc and is very like well fleshed out as a consequence of this. So all is going good. We get to see Sanji's motivation through him feeding Gin, which Gin gets introduced by literally just blowing someone's like head off, like first second he's introduced. And they don't really do it like that in One Piece anymore. Old One Piece was a little more violent, but that's a discussion for another time. Eventually, even though Gin is like this horrible pirate who's works with this infamous man who we don't know about yet, called Don Krieg, we just know his name. And we're just like told Sanji's a good guy, and that's what really makes Luffy want to recruit him. Not like some weird like obsession with his food or anything, because Sanji's food is like good, don't get me wrong. That's like very stated more than enough in the story for me to get the idea of that. But Luffy wanted him because of his character, not because of his cooking. And I think that really like reinforces Luffy's like whole character dynamic of as well, which is kind of awesome how Oda ties it all together like that. It's really good writing. And eventually after Gin shows up, he eats, he starts crying, we're like, I'll never forget this guy. I'm bringing my crew back and we're gonna eat and whatever. And so the whole Don Krieg crew pulls up, and Don Krieg is just a total cunt, like honestly. He's just a dickhead. He like demands food, they give it to him, like he's begging for his life, and then he starts shooting up the restaurant for no reason. Gonna take it as his new ship, I guess, enslave the crew maybe. I don't really know what he was planning on doing with them, maybe just killing them all. But he basically bit the hand that fed him, and he kind of pays for that because guess who he brings back with him? Fucking Mihawk, the most powerful character in the story introduced at this point. This like introduces the whole like glimpse into the greater power scaling of the One Piece world, where Mihawk pulls up, slices a giant ship in half, and no one can do anything to him. His whole fight with Zoro goes down, where Zoro wants to be the strongest in the world, so he's like, I gotta fight this guy right now, see if I'm the strongest. But he really wasn't. Mihawk says, you're a frog in the well. What the fuck ever he says. Some like weird analogy like that. And Zoro gets his ass beat, gets really fucked up, starts crying, I'll never lose again. All that shit happens. And that fight, honestly, it just like sets the stage for what's coming, so it is just generally like super important to the overall like, I guess, world building of One Piece, like at this point in the series, because once we get into the Grand Line, it doesn't matter as much. We see other powerful people, but right now, Mihawk is really like the only actually strong person we've seen. The strongest person up to this point is Luffy, or like maybe you could say Don Krieg, even though he gets his ass beat, but Don Krieg is Don Krieg. His strongest attack is like poison gas. Mihawk could probably slice like a continent in half. There's a bit of a difference. So,
with Mihawk out of the way, let's move on to Krieg himself. Like I brought up, his strongest attack is poison gas, though that doesn't really happen until the end. Krieg is known for being like a very dirty fighter. That's why his bounty is so high, because so like I think they say at some point like he raises the white flag to surrender, but then he'll fire upon you, and just other bullshit like that. Like I said, Krieg is an asshole. But I don't know. There's not too much to say about him. I honestly liked him a lot more than the previous villains. He does a lot better job than Kuro. I like him better than Buggy, but Buggy isn't the worst, and he's obviously better than Morgan. I don't know if Morgan's even worth bringing up here. He gets blown out of the water by Kuro. His whole like shtick of just having a fuck ton of different weapons on him at all times is just kind of funny, and I fucked with it. The fact that he's just lugging around like multiple tons of weapons all the time, it's pretty cool. His whole like bomb sphere was a pretty unique idea, and something I've really never seen before or since. It's a 2-ton golden bomb sphere. Like, who the fuck? How do you think of it? I'm like impressed that Oda managed to come up with that. He does like get super creative with the movesets of his characters, which it seems like every character here has his own like shtick. With Buggy having the devil fruit, Morgan having the axe hand. I don't know, not the craziest but Kuro having like the early form of shave or Soru's. I forget exactly what it's called. The Mystic's powers. If it's technically that. It looks and sounds exactly like it at least. Maybe it was like foreshadowing. Maybe it was just a reused idea. I don't know. We don't know what actually comes up in the story. So overall, this arc is a lot better than all of the arcs behind it. It's definitely like a step up above the other ones. So with that in mind, and maybe a little personal bias here, but this arc definitely goes in good tier. So now we're getting on to a really significant arc here, with Arlong Park being what I see most like new One Piece people talking about, or not even just new One Piece people, like old people as well, but people when they're new to One Piece. Like, this is their hook arc. This is the arc that really gets them invested into the story. Now, I personally can't relate to that due to Baratie being more of my shit, but I still fucking love this arc. Like, I don't know, just like the whole, like, every aspect of this arc is just done so well by Oda. Whether it be like the mystery at first, where you don't know what happened with Nami because she betrays the crew of Baratie, which I'm more including that as part of this arc because that's after those whole events end, so I'll more include it here. The mystery of just like what happened with Nami, like why did she betray us? Because Nami before was like always on edge around the crew. It didn't seem like she was the most relaxed, but it seemed like everyone was getting along, and while there was this weird like hint in the air of something being off, you never really imagine it to go as deep as Nami like stealing the ship and betraying the whole crew. So the Straw Hats are broken up into two groups like at the start of this arc, with Yosaku, Johnny, who go off and do their own thing as soon as they get there, and Zoro and Usopp all pulling up at the same time together. And then the later group, Luffy and Sanji, like boating over at the time, coming from Baratie. So let's start off where like the mystery aspect is still continuing, because Luffy and Sanji are just on a boat right now. The most I could really say is they fuck up a big fish that looks like a cow. That's kind of funny, I guess, but... So Usopp and Zoro pull up to the islands. They just find it to be completely fucked up and destroyed. I think they come across an entire village where all the houses are flipped over at some point. And they're just like, what the fuck happened here? And slowly, just like as they get through the island, you get like drip-fed more and more information. Like, they run into a fishman pretty quickly, but they don't run into Arlong right away. So, I don't think you're even like introduced to what a fishman is yet. Like, I think Yosaku and Johnny like bring it up a little bit, how it's like, there are these race of men, or fishmen, who live in the water and are 10 times stronger than humans. And this guy, Arlong, is the sworn brother of Jinbei, because that's a whole plot point. Jinbei gets introduced for the first time in this arc as a silhouette. Not really, like, as a character, but you'll see him again in, like, 300 chapters. I don't even know how fucking long the gap is between this. It's, like, pretty significant, though. So, that, like, whole idea is introduced. Usopp is scared shitless. Zoro is just wandering around lost at this point. And Usopp gets into a little scuffle with them. It all works out. I think he plays dead or something. And he starts to get to talking with the villagers. And I think he runs into Nojiko first. Like, Nojiko and some little kid, if I'm remembering correctly, are the first people he runs into. He saves them from a fishman, and they're, like, talking to him because he obviously just saved their lives. And that's how, like, we slowly get information of what happens, how the fishermen are collecting a tax on all the villagers, and if you don't pay, all your fucking houses get flipped over and you die, basically. And so Usopp is now looking for Nami, which seems to have a very bad reputation among the villagers. They all seem to know her, which sort of hints at the idea that this is where Nami is from. And eventually, because I think Usopp runs into her first, because both Zoro and Usopp run into her, where Usopp running into her first, where he manages to get into Arlong's base actually. There's like a whole crazy diversion, and he's like, Nami, come on, we can get away. And then like, she like does that whole stab fake out where he falls into the water, which honestly adds to the mystery even more, because it's like, holy shit, did Nami just kill Usopp? Like, it's early enough into the story where you could like feasibly see that happening, where the characters aren't like developed enough, where it's like killing off someone who's been around for like 20 years. It's more like, this guy was introduced 2 arcs ago, he could die. So the stakes are pretty high. You have no idea if Usopp is dead or not for a little while, but eventually he pops back up, and then that just kind of adds to the mystery even more. So it's not even like, so is Nami this weird evil person? I thought she killed Usopp, but she didn't. So it's like, what is she really like motivated by here? And then Zoro eventually runs into her too. They have like that whole same dynamic. Zoro like tries to kill himself, Nami saves him, and the fishmen are like getting like suspicious at this point. He's like, why the fuck did you save him? And then that leads to a plot point later on, but more and more, it's just like, you're just confused as a reader trying to like get your bearings, I guess, just figure out what the character's motivations are. And eventually, Luffy and Sanji pull up. They fucking cause a whole shitstorm when they pull up. I think Luffy hits Zoro with a ship on land, which, I know that sounds fucking crazy, but this is One Piece. So they all show up. Luffy runs into Nami. Nami basically essentially tells him to fuck off, and Sanji is immediately riding her dick because of Sanji. He loves women. It's not too annoying by this point in the story yet. I honestly found Usopp more annoying than Sanji at this point in the story. But while Usopp gets progressively better throughout the story, I feel like Sanji's little quirk with like women gets worse. So take that as you will. But they eventually get there. Some more events happen. Luffy like meets the villagers. Nami finally gets her 100 million berries, and it seems like, wow, so all's well ends well. Arlong will let her go, and I guess even though she did betray the crew, she could come back now. And obviously Arlong betrays her with Nezumi, that rat fucker, but that scene, like, in general, is just, like, so emotional. I don't know if Nami's backstory becomes before or after this. I think it comes before, so I'll get into that. So Nami's backstory, with Sanji's backstory in the previous arc being a step above everything before that, Nami's backstory completely blows everything before that out of the water with her tragic backstory in Belmere. And debatably her backstory, like, even till this day, is one of the best in One Piece. It's honestly kind of insane how well Oda, like, wrote Nami's backstory, and just, like, with Belmere and Nojiko, just how tragic it was. Which, if you don't know her backstory, Nami gets adopted, like, by Belmere, and Nojiko also gets adopted. They're not even related sisters, but they're in a war-torn country. Both their parents probably dead, so who else but someone to adopt them? And eventually things are going great. You know, their kids being kids, normal family problems. Then all of a sudden one day a fishman pirate pulls up, Arlong, and he's demanding a tax from everyone, which I think it's like 25 something berries for an adult, like 2,500,000 or 25,000, some number like that, and half of as much for the kids, or maybe it's more, I don't know. And from that point, it's like Nojiko, or Belmere, I don't know how the fuck I'm confusing their names so much, but Belmere is known for being not the most, like, wealthy person in the village. I think she's, like, honestly maybe the poorest, if not, like, among the poorest in the village. So she only has enough for either herself or her 2 children. And she ultimately elects to sacrifice herself, paying for her 2 children, and just, like, reinforcing the idea again of just, like, how important family is, and if you're not willing to die for your family, what are you willing to die for, you know? And this is shown in the last arc through Sanji and Zeph, and, like, that whole backstory of him cutting off his leg and eating it. But this just shows that, like, I feel like while it isn't as graphic or violent, I mean, their mom is still getting shot in front of them. It's still pretty fucking graphic, but it isn't cannibalism. But it just does it better for being not as extreme. And so with that, Nami gets her berries stolen. That's just, like, one of, I think, like, the cruelest moment in the story, like, so far. Because there have been definitely fucked up things happening in One Piece so far, but just Nami getting, like, watching her life's work for the past 10 years, everything she works for, just, like, ripped away from her right in front of her eyes. Just, like, makes you feel so bad for her, just, like, some type of way. It's just fucked. So that eventually leads to Nami just running into the village, like stabbing her Arlong tattoo, screaming like Arlong, 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 over and over again, because she's just so pissed that he fucked her over, he tricked her again. And now the last 10 years have been for nothing, and she basically just gave him 100 million berries for free, which is an insane amount of money at this point in One Piece. Literally took Nami like 10 years to gather it, which this also like explains her whole like thievery quirk. Makes a lot of sense. And I feel like this is like one of the best explanations for a quirk in One Piece. Like up there with Usopp's lying, because Usopp's backstory, well, it wasn't really the craziest. It still did make a lot of sense on why he lied so much and explained like his motivations for that fairly well, even if it was annoying. But this like explains Nami completely. You really get where she's coming from as a character. And Nami was by far before this arc the least developed of the crew. We knew nothing about her, so this arc really just like fixes that issue. And I feel like Oda was like building up to this throughout the whole saga, so no wonder it's the best arc. Even though I'd say Baratie is my favorite, Arlong Park is undeniably the best throughout the saga. The East Blue Saga. And so with that out of the way, Luffy shows up, and this time Nami doesn't push him away, and instead he gives her his straw hat, which is his greatest possession, which has been highlighted a lot throughout the past arcs. And it really just gets into like how much Luffy cares about his friends, reinforcing that like one final time in the East Blue before they like get ready for their grand journey. And I feel like if this was in real life and character-wise, this would be the moment that the Straw Hats really like knew Luffy was their commander and he would be there for them no matter what. Because right after the scene is just the walk to Arlong Park, and that scene, even if it isn't like the craziest by modern day One Piece standards, is just so memorable. Even like thinking about it now, I can imagine the music playing and just them fucking walking. It's so hype, even though I haven't watched that episode in probably like 3 years. I can still remember it clearly. You really can't beat the walk to Arlong Park. And then, after that hype moment, we're finally there. We run into Yosaku and Johnny again. They got their asses beat by Arlong. I'm really surprised he didn't just kill them, but who knows? I like them, so I'm glad they're not dead, but kind of weird. Who cares? And then the crew pulls up for their fight, and Luffy is fighting Arlong, and the other 3 crew members are fighting his 3 lackeys, or his 3 main ones. Luffy kind of just takes out all the fodder right away, but gets him stuck in the ground in the process. But I'll talk about the smaller fights first. So first off, we got Zoro versus Hachi. I'm starting out with this one because, in my opinion, it's the weakest out of the 4. Honestly, just because like Zoro is nerfed, and he feels so far out of Hachi's league that it's just kind of like, he could blow this guy out of the water if he really wants to. This is just kind of being padded narratively. Now, that isn't to hate on Hachi or like the Zoro fight in general, because it is still fairly cool. Can't really hate on a Zoro fight. He's got a cool moveset, and Hachi's whole like 8-sword style thing, and I think he eventually goes under the water at one point too, like showing that fishermen are stronger under there. It's fairly cool. And Zoro's finisher on him, the Dragon Twister, is also just fucking sick. But overall, it's just the weakest. Not to say it's bad, but just like the weakest out of the 4. Usopp's fight, I'm gonna talk about next, which this one being super creative, honestly. He's fighting Chu here, which is like the most forgettable out of Arlong's lackeys. I like Hachi better than him. I like this fight better than Hachi's fight though. So Chu is just kind of like there. He's got a long mouth. He's a sniper of Arlong's crew, I would assume, because all of his attacks are ranged. So it's a good matchup for Usopp, sniper v sniper. But Usopp is really just pulling out all of the stops here, with pulling out literally just everything he has on him, like Don Krieg style. He pulls out like alcohol during this fight, fucking makes a makeshift Molotov, all of his like slingshot shots, all the different ones he could come up with, even like a fucking Tabasco shot. Pulls out a rubber band at some point, a hammer. That's how he wins the fight, bludgeoning the guy. But overall, just like a really creative moveset, and not really a fight I was expecting to see. So I'd rank it higher than the Zoro fight, just because of how creative it is. And it is just really satisfying to watch Usopp beat someone. He's supposed to be the everyman of the crew, so when he does get a victory, it always feels well earned and just super well thought out by him. Because those are his strengths, not like his strength. His speed is arguably one of his strengths, I can't deny that. He's a fast runner. But really his main strength is just like his intelligence and like, I guess his battle IQ. Just pulling out random shit mid-battle. Whatever strategies he can come up with. So, next up we have Karubi versus Sanji. Now, this one is also really cool with... I like how Sanji is really choreographed in this fight. With the whole like martial artist v martial artist thing being pretty cool. Oda did some good matchups with these fights. Like, all of the fighters pair up to their opponents fairly well. With Hachi being the swordman, Shu being the sniper, and Karubi being like, I don't know, a martial artist like Sanji. they all like kind of fit. So that fight is fairly cool. I feel like a good majority of it takes place underwater, which is honestly fairly good. It highlights just how strong fishermen can be in the water because whether this fight being in the water or not, like, changes it from one scene role to another. Because on the land, Sanji is fucking Furubi up, but in the water, Sanji is like running for his life, trying to save Luffy, which gets stuck in the cement, thrown into some water. That's a whole plot thing that's going on right now. But Sanji pulls off some cool ass moves. I remember he blows air into Furubi's gills at some point. I thought that was like pretty creative and just super cool. Like, you wouldn't really think of doing that, but Sanji pulls it off. And overall, well, it isn't like as creative as Usopp's. I would say this is a pretty good fight. Yeah, last but obviously not least, we got Luffy versus Arlong. Now, the first part of this fight, Luffy's literally just grounding. Gets stuck into cement. Arlong grips him jump into the ground and just throws him into the water. And Luffy is just kind of felt from there. So Sanji has to pull up and save him. So there's Benzo and the rest of the villagers. Or Benzo from Nami's backstory. Not really all that significant of a character. Pretty cool guy though. And so after Luffy gets out of that, the real fight with Arlong begins. And Arlong, like, he uses his like shark fishman biology in a really cool way to fight. Like, you could really tell that his moveset can't be replicated by anyone else just because of how he is. He uses his teeth a lot, like, as his main fighting point, and just like his like absurd super strength. Eventually he whips out a sword too. I forget what it was called, like shark skin or shark teeth or whatever. It's got a fuck ton of triangle like blades on it that look like shark teeth, which I fuck with. And eventually the fight just like devolves into an all-out brawl between Luffy and Arlong, with Luffy just kind of fucking him up. And the fight eventually goes inside Arlong Park, where we're shown Nami's like map room. I think we're shown it in her backstory as well, but this is where we really get to see it. And the symbolism for this room is pretty heavy, where basically it, like signifying that Nami is a prisoner of Arlong, and this is where she's been stuck for the past like 10 years being chained up. So mid-fight, Luffy, while like charging up a massive Gum Gum axe, where he throws his foot like all the way up into the sky and then brings it down, just like destroys the entirety of Arlong Park. But what he was really aiming for there was one Arlong, who was charging straight at him, where Luffy just kind of like tanks his hit here, which is pretty cool. But he was aiming more as well for the map room, just to like free Nami in a sense, which is just a really cool plot point because again, just reinforcing the idea that Luffy would do anything for his friends. He would break anything, build anything, kill anyone, give you whatever you want. He's your friend no matter what if you're his. And this is really like the quintessential like East Blue arc. It really defines everyone's character traits in their own ways, like all the dynamics between the crew. Like even Zoro and Nami, though they like had some beef in this arc, it really just like shows how they're the two serious crewmates. And while Zoro and Nami, like, they aren't the best of friends, there's like this like unspoken bond between them where they're like the serious ones of the crew, at least so far at this part. And everyone else, while they'll mess around, they know that like at the end of the day, Zoro or Nami will really assess the situation for what it is. Because all the other characters can get clouded, whether it's Luffy from just wanting fun, Usopp from being like terrified, or Sanji with woman. Zoro and Nami usually make the best like tactical or just like the best decisions in a situation in general. Which is like kind of like makes sense why there'd be some animosity here, because Zoro is just looking at Nami not as his friend at that point, but as someone who basically fucked them over and stole their ship. But he still does like deep down trust Nami, which is why he throws himself in that water and knew she would like come to save him. And you really just like get a feel for who the characters will be in the entire story for this arc. Whether it be Luffy being the goofy guy that stands up for his friends at the end, Zoro being the serious swordsman who's kind of goofy sometimes but is mostly serious and also gets lost, Usopp being a terrified coward who will eventually do what's right at the end, even if he does have to run away first, and Sanji being a womanizer. I think that's reinforced in this arc, but just like overall being a stand-up guy and working for this crew. I feel like Sanji gets developed the least in this arc. To be fair, Baratie was more his ship. He's more well-established there. And Nami, this obviously being like her arc, and you just like finally understanding her. This is really just like the best undisputed arc in the East Blue, and it does a lot really good. So with that all in mind, I think I might honestly put it either in Goated or Peak. I'm kind of debating here. No, I'm gonna put it in Peak. Arlong Park deserves to be up here in Peak, I feel like, because Oda just does it so well. Coming down from the comparative high of Arlong Park, we're going to a more like calm world building arc with Loguetown. And Loguetown is not a bad arc by any means. It I really can't think of any problems with it, like objectively thinking about it. The Straw Hats, now we got the whole 5 main crew finally all together again. Everyone's introduced, you get an idea of who the characters are, so it's more just watching the crew interact in a new place, and there is like also a lot of world building factors introduced, but for the first half of this like arc, it's really just the Straw Hats like running through chores. Like Luffy checks out the birthplace of the Pirate King, which yeah, that's what Loguetown is. It's where Goldie Roger, wealth, fame, and power, is born and also executed, which I don't even think I have to talk about the symbolism there. I feel like you can get that. How Luffy going there, who wants to be the king of the pirates. Is that the first time I brought up Luffy's dream in this video? It might be, but Luffy's dream to become the king of the pirates, and just like how this was basically his predecessor, the guy he has to replicate, and this is where he died, so it's kind of a big thing for Luffy. Of course he isn't taking it too seriously, Luffy never does, he just loves fucking around, which it's respectable. You definitely can't like hate on Luffy's outlook on life. It's really nice. And everyone's really just running chores. I think Sanji is just in that whole filler cooking tournament that isn't in the manga. I think in the manga he just kind of fucks off and does something else. Zoro is shopping for new swords with the Sandai Kitetsu and the Yubashiri. I think those are the two he gets here, to replace the 2 swords he broke against Mihawk, which were unnamed. But this is where the like sword grading system gets introduced by Tashigi as well, which Tashigi, Smoker's lieutenant, I'll get into him later, but Tashigi basically explains that there are like excellent grade blades, amazing grade blades, great blades, good blades, and it just like goes down, they're all named. And I don't remember like the rankings of the swords Zoro got, but his main white one, the Wado Ichimonji, I think, is like super high ranked, and the other ones are fairly well ranked as well. So we basically get introduced to that whole system there. Then Zoro fucking throws the Kitetsu in the air, see if we cut off his arm. That's pretty fucking metal. Usopp is doing that whole thing with that sniper daddy guy. No, I'm not calling him daddy. I don't know, that guy's pretty fucking jacked though, but that's just his name because he has a daughter, I guess. I don't know, weird naming scheme, but who am I to judge? My name is fucking thrice twice. Loguetown really doesn't have anything all that significant happening. Nami is just kind of chilling during this arc as well. I really forget what she gets up to, if it's anything important. But they're really just running chores until they run into Buggy again, who also comes back in this arc with Alvida, who ate a devil fruit. Which, a lot of devil fruits get introduced into this arc now that I'm thinking about it. Like, does anyone else besides Buggy have a devil fruit in the East Blue that we meet that isn't Luffy? I don't think so. None of the villains have one besides Buggy, so Alvida having a devil fruit is still pretty significant at this point in the story. She has a slip fruit, all attacks bounce off her. Really not impressive in the grand scheme of things, but at the time, it's pretty valuable. We eventually get introduced to Smoker, who is the main, like, bad guy, I guess, in this arc. He's more of an anti-hero, because he's not a prick, but he is still coming after Luffy and the gang, so how much do you really want me to be on his side? Your ice cream ate my pants, or whatever the fuck he says to that little kid. That's really what I was just thinking of when I was saying that, but no, my pants ate your ice cream. My ice cream ate your pants. No, that would make him like a pedophile, but anyway, going back from off topic, Smoker eventually comes across Luffy as he's getting executed by Buggy, because Buggy, through like some weird like event sequence, just gets Luffy in the same exact spot Roger was. and he's about to like cut his head off, but then suddenly a random bolt of lightning drops from the sky that takes him out, which you eventually find out wasn't so random. This is where Dragon gets introduced, which, like, is kind of crazy looking back on it, considering Dragon isn't even fleshed out now, like 20 years later, but he gets introduced here, with him scaring the fuck out of Smoker, eventually, but we're not there yet. So Buggy tries to assassinate him, or Luffy. That doesn't work because of the lightning, and then Smoker gets drawn to all this commotion. So now there are two pirate crews, being Buggy and Luffy, who he had already been pre-warned about. Luffy now having the highest bounty in the East Blue with 30 million berries, and this being 10 million, or basically like 50% higher than Arlong's bounty, which was 20 million, which was the highest we knew about before then. All the other villains are somewhere in the tens of millions, not like a crazy amount of difference, but significant for the like framing of early One Piece. So that whole thing happens, Smoker catches Buggy and Alvida. We get to introduce the idea of a Logia fruit, which this is basically just like a devil fruit lightning round here. You really get introduced to more like devil fruits and how it's going to be once you go into the Grand Line, where devil fruit users are more of a dime a dozen there, but they really just aren't as common in the East Blue, which is shown from just like even normal villagers just not knowing what the fuck they are, and them being considered like some kind of myth. But that whole idea sort of gets like phased out here with, I don't know what kind of devil fruit Dragon has. I don't know if it's even named yet. It could be a Logia, it could be a Paramecia, but we've got 2 out of the 3 main types so far. I'm not counting mythical zones in there since they're technically zones, but we don't even have zones yet, so either way, well, I guess technically Luffy's fruit is a mythical zone, but fuck you, it's a Paramecia right now. Anyway, getting off topic again, Luffy and the gang eventually escape through improbable events and Dragon showing up, and they're on their way to the Grand Line, which will lead us to our next arc. But ranking this one, I feel like it is definitely a good tier. Honestly, looking at this, I think I might bump Baratie up one, because I feel like it is above Loguetown, but Loguetown isn't on the same tier as these two. It's like its own thing. Yeah, no, that's kind of why I have this tier here, honestly. So for East Blue, we got Syrup Village and kind of shit. For mid, we got Orange Town and Romance Dawn. For good, we got Loguetown. And for goaded, we got Baratie. And last but not least, we got Arlong Park in Peak.